The thing you have to understand is that we were happy. Genuinely, deliriously happy. For the first time in our adult lives, Chloe and I felt like we had finally landed. For 5 years, we'd been paying a fortune to live in a glorified shoebox in the city. A place where the sirens were our lullaby and the smell of hot garbage in July was the official scent of summer. We'd saved every penny, skipped vacations, drank cheap coffee, all for one single goal. A patch of green grass and a front door that was ours and ours alone. And we got it. A single-story ranch house, built in the 70s, nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street in a suburb that looked like it was pulled straight from a movie set. It wasn't perfect. The kitchen had hideous avocado green countertops, and the shag carpet in the spare bedroom had probably seen things we didn't want to know about. But it was ours. It had good bones, as Chloe liked to say. It had a smell, not a bad smell, just an old one. Like old wood, and decades of forgotten dinners, and the faint dusty scent of time itself. It felt solid, it felt safe. That was the most important thing. Safe. After years of feeling like we were just two more anonymous drones in the urban hive, this house felt like a fortress of tranquility. We'd walk down the street in the evening holding hands and actual neighbors would wave from their porches. It was surreal. We moved in on a crisp Saturday in October. The air was cool, the leaves were turning, and the entire world seemed to be saturated in a warm, golden light. We spent the day hauling boxes, sweating and swearing and laughing. By the time the sun went down, we were exhausted but buzzing. We didn't even set up the bed. We ordered a pizza, sat on the floor of our empty living room, and ate it straight out of the box, our voices echoing in the bare space. "We did it, Liam," Chloe said, her voice soft. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a little smear of tomato sauce on her chin. "We actually did it." I wrapped my arm around her. We did. Outside, the street was silent except for the chirping of crickets. No traffic, no shouting, no distant alarms. Just peace. It was everything we'd dreamed of. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and organizing. That's when we tackled the attic. It was more of a crawl space, really, accessible by a rickety pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I went up first, my phone's flashlight cutting a wobbly beam through the thick, dusty darkness. It was hot up there, stifling, the air thick with the smell of insulation and forgotten things. The light from the hallway cast long, spooky shadows, and I could hear Chloe below. "See anything interesting?" she called up. "Just a whole lot of dust and a ghost from 1978, I think," I joked, my voice muffled. I swept the light around. It was mostly empty, just some old insulation and wooden beams. But in the far corner, tucked away under the eaves, was something else. A box. It was a dark green metal box, the kind you'd see in an old army surplus store. It was heavy, and the latch was rusted shut. "Hey, I found something," I called down. "It's some kind of old footlocker or something." I dragged it across the wooden planks, dust billowing up around me, making me cough. It was a two-person job getting it down the flimsy ladder. We set it on the hallway floor, both of us covered in a fine layer of gray grime. Chloe was practically vibrating with curiosity. Her eyes, which were a bright, inquisitive blue, were wide. "What do you think is inside?" she whispered, as if the house itself were listening. "Old tax records? A collection of cursed dolls? The previous owner's secret stamp collection?" I said, grabbing a screwdriver from my toolbox. The lock was stubborn. It took me a good 5 minutes of prying and grunting before it finally gave way with a sickening metallic screech. We both leaned in close. The smell that wafted out was a mix of old celluloid and cardboard. Inside, nestled in yellowed brittle foam, were about a dozen small circular reels of film. Super -8 film. Each one was stored in its own little cardboard box, and on each box was a carefully handwritten label. Chloe picked one up, handling it like a fragile historical artifact. She read the label out loud. "Lan's 5th birthday, 1975. She picked up another. "Christmas, 1976. And another. "Summer vacation at the beach, 1977. They were home movies. A whole family's history, packed away and forgotten in our attic. It felt intimate. We were holding someone's memories in our hands. A family named Lon, I guessed. Or maybe Lon was the little girl. We spent a few minutes just looking at the titles, imagining the lives of these strangers who had walked the same floors, looked out the same windows. It was a strange connection to the past, a thread stretching back almost 50 years. "God, home movies," Chloe said, a nostalgic smile on her face. "My dad used to have a bunch of these. Tapes, though, not old-timey film reels." "We have to watch them," I said. The words came out before I even really thought about them. The idea was just too intriguing to ignore. We were living in their house. It only seemed right that we should know who they were. How? Chloe asked, gesturing to the reels. We don't exactly have a 1970s-era cinema in our back pocket. I have an idea, I said. I'd met one of our neighbors the day before, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down. He was watering his prize-winning roses and had given me a friendly wave. He told me he'd lived on this street since the houses were built. He'd seen it all. If anyone had a Super -8 projector, it would be him. So later that afternoon I walked over. His house was immaculate, the lawn perfectly manicured. He answered the door with a warm, slightly frail smile. He was a small man, thin, with kind, watery eyes behind thick glasses. He seemed genuinely pleased to have a visitor. When I explained what we'd found and asked if he, by any chance, had a projector, his face lit up. Well, I'll be, he said, his voice a soft, reedy rasp. Super -8. I haven't heard that name in years. Yes, son, I believe I do. In the basement somewhere. A marvelous machine. A way to capture moments. Keep them forever. He had a far-off look in his eyes for a second. You wait right here. He disappeared into his house, and I could hear him shuffling around for a few minutes before he re-emerged, carrying a heavy, boxy case. He handed it to me with a surprising amount of strength. Here she is, a Bell & Howell. Still works like a charm last I checked, he said. The bulb might be a little dim, but it'll do the trick. It's a wonderful thing you're doing, you know. Giving those memories life again. A house isn't just wood and nails. It has a soul. It remembers. I thanked him profusely, told him we'd take good care of it, and carried the projector back home like it was a sacred relic. Chloe met me at the door, her excitement palpable. That night, after a quick dinner, we turned our living room into a makeshift movie theater. We pushed the sofa back, tacked up a white bedsheet on the wall opposite, and I spent 20 minutes figuring out how to thread the film through the projector's complicated series of rollers and sprockets. Mr. Henderson was right. It was a marvelous machine, a relic from a different, more mechanical age. Finally, we were ready. We picked the first reel, Land's 5th birthday, 1975. I turned off the lights, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The only illumination came from the dim power light on the projector. Chloe snuggled up next to me on the floor, her head on a cushion. It felt cozy. It felt romantic. A private screening of a ghost family's life. I flipped the switch. The projector whirred to life with a loud, rhythmic clicking. A bright, empty white rectangle appeared on the sheet, dancing with dust motes. And then, the image flickered into focus. It was grainy, the colors washed out and tinged with yellow, but it was unmistakably a child's birthday party. A little girl with pigtails was blowing out candles on a cake. Other kids in bell-bottoms and striped shirts were running around a living room that looked vaguely familiar. A man who was presumably her father was holding the camera, his voice muffled and distant as he encouraged her to make a wish. The image shook a little, the way home movies always do. It was charming, it was innocent. We sat there in the dark, smiling, ready for our journey into the quiet, happy past of our new home. The projector hummed, its rhythmic clicks filling the quiet space between us. On the bedsheet, the grainy, sepia-toned world of 1975 played out. The little girl, Lan, maybe 5 or 6, was chasing a golden retriever around a sun-drenched backyard. The camera jiggled as the person holding it, probably her dad, laughed. It was pure, unfiltered happiness. Chloe was leaning against me, her head resting on my shoulder. I could feel her smiling. They look so happy, she whispered, her voice soft in the dark room. This makes the house feel, I don't know, lived in, like it has good vibes baked into the walls. I knew what she meant. For the last hour we'd been completely captivated. We were watching ghosts, but they weren't scary. They were just people. People who had loved this house before us. People who had celebrated birthdays and holidays within these same 4 walls. The first reel, Land's 5th birthday, was followed by Christmas 1976. We watched the same family opening presents around a tinsel-laden tree, right here in what was now our living room. We saw Lan get a brand new bicycle, her face a perfect picture of childhood joy. We saw the mom, a woman with a kind face and a fashionable 70s haircut, hand the dad a terribly ugly sweater, and we watched him pretend to love it. We were starting to feel like we knew them. We'd make little comments, filling in the blanks. He totally hated that sweater, I chuckled. Oh, for sure, Chloe agreed. But look at her. She's so proud of herself for picking it out. This is so sweet, Liam. I'm so glad you found these. It felt like a privilege, being let into this secret history. The house wasn't just a structure of wood and plaster anymore. It was a repository of memories, and we were its new curators. The avocado green countertops in the kitchen didn't seem so bad when you could picture that smiling woman cooking a Christmas dinner on them. The whole experience was wrapping the house around us like a warm, comfortable blanket. It was validating our decision, making our fortress of tranquility feel even more impenetrable. When the Christmas reel finished, its plastic tail flapping rhythmically against the projector gate, I got up to thread the next one. The little cardboard box was labeled in the same neat, slightly faded handwriting. Family dinner, late 1976. Ready for Act 3? I asked, my fingers fumbling with the tiny sprockets in the dim light. Absolutely, Chloe said, snuggling deeper into the floor cushions. I'm invested now. I need to know if Lan ever learned to ride that bike without training wheels. I flicked the switch. The fan whirred, the bulb glowed, and the familiar clicking started up again. A new scene flickered onto the sheet. It was the family's dining room, which adjoined our living room. It looked almost identical to how it did now, minus our half-unpacked boxes. The same family was there. The dad was at the head of the table, carving what looked like a roast chicken. The mom was passing a bowl of mashed potatoes to Lan. A younger boy, who we hadn't seen as clearly in the other films, sat next to her, making a face at his green beans. It was the picture of domestic bliss. Normal. Wholesome. The camera was steadier this time. Less shaky than the birthday party or the Christmas morning chaos. It was just observing. For a minute or two, we watched in comfortable silence. It was just another slice of their life. Mundane, but sweet. Then, Chloe shifted next to me. Huh, she said softly. It wasn't a happy huh, it was a puzzled one. What? I asked, my eyes still on the screen. That's weird. She sat up a little straighter, her body tensing. The angle. What about the angle? I said. Looks fine to me. No, I mean, where is the camera? She said, pointing at the sheet. Look, just look at it. I focused, trying to see what she was seeing. The scene continued to play. The mom laughed at something the dad said. Lan stole a dinner roll from her brother's plate. It was all happening inside the dining room. I didn't get it. It's in the dining room, Chloe. Where else would it be? I said, a little impatiently. No, it's not, she insisted. Her voice had a new edge to it. Look at the window, the one behind the dad. I squinted. The dining room had a large picture window that looked out onto the side yard, the same one we had now. In the film, the window was dark, reflecting the light of the room back into the lens. But as I watched, I started to see it. The camera wasn't just capturing the reflection. It was capturing the window itself. You could see the slight shimmer of the glass pane. You could see the wooden frame of the window from the outside. The camera wasn't in the room with them. It was in the yard, in the dark, pointed through the glass. My stomach did a slow, cold somersault. Stop the film, Chloe said. Her voice was flat. I reached over and flicked the switch. The light died. The clicking stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the projector's cooling fan. The white sheet on our wall was now just an empty, glaring rectangle. It's outside, Chloe stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Someone was standing outside, filming them through the window while they ate dinner. The cozy, nostalgic bubble we'd been floating in didn't just pop, it shattered. All the warmth drained out of the room, replaced by a damp, creeping chill. The charming home movie had just turned into something else entirely. Something voyeuristic. Something ugly. No, that can't be right, I said, but my own voice sounded hollow and unconvincing. I was trying to find another explanation. Any other explanation. Maybe it was a joke. You know, like the dad propped the camera up on the windowsill outside to get a good shot of everyone. Like an early version of a selfie stick. Even as I said it, I knew how stupid it sounded. The camera wasn't stationary. It moved slightly, a gentle, almost imperceptible sway, like someone trying to hold their body perfectly still. And there was a subtle zoom, a slow push-in on Lan as she laughed. It wasn't a static, propped-up camera. It was being held. By someone. We both sat there in the dark for what felt like an eternity. The image of that happy, oblivious family being secretly recorded was burned into my mind. They had felt safe, just like we had. They were in their dining room, sharing a meal, totally unaware that a pair of eyes and a lens were watching them from the darkness just a few feet away. The clicking of the projector, which had been the charming soundtrack to our evening, now seemed like a countdown clock. I thought of Mr. Henderson's words. A way to capture moments, keep them forever. A house isn't just wood and nails. It has a soul. It remembers. The words that had sounded so folksy and wise now felt sinister. What else did this house remember? Slowly, as if I were moving through water, I stood up. I walked over to our living room window, the one that looked out onto the front yard. My hand was shaking slightly as I pulled back the edge of the curtain. Outside, the street was bathed in the cool, sterile glow of a single streetlight. A car passed by, its headlights sweeping across our lawn. Everything looked normal. Peaceful. But it didn't feel that way anymore. I turned and looked towards our own dining room, at the large window on the side of the house. It was a black, depthless square. I could see the faint reflection of our living room, of Chloe still sitting on the floor, of the projector on the coffee table. I walked over to it and peered out. It was pitch black in the side yard, an inky void between our house and our neighbor's fence. I could just make out the shape of the big oak tree and the rose bushes Chloe had been talking about planting. And I could picture it. I could picture someone standing there, silent and hidden, nestled in the shadows, holding a camera, aiming it right at this window, right where that family had been eating, right where we would be eating. The feeling was so visceral, so horribly real, that I actually flinched back from the glass. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A house has a soul. It remembers. I let the curtain fall and turned back to Chloe. Her face was pale in the dim light from the hallway. The magic was gone. The adventure of finding the films, the romance of watching them, it had all curdled into a knot of dread in my gut. This wasn't a sweet family history. This was evidence. Okay, I said, forcing a breath. I needed to be the rational one. I needed to put the lid back on this box. Okay, look. It's creepy. I get it. It's super creepy. But it was 50 years ago. It was probably, I don't know, a weirdo neighbor who has been dead for decades. Or maybe it really was a relative playing a stupid, unfunny prank on them. It has nothing to do with us. I was talking to myself as much as I was to her. I walked back to the projector and picked up the pile of remaining films. I needed to break the spell. I needed to find a normal one. My fingers fumbled through the little boxes. Land's Recital, 1978. Halloween, 1978. My eyes landed on the next one in the sequence. The label was bright, cheerful. Look, I said, holding it up. My attempt at a confident smile felt like a grimace. Kingi He Abien 1977. I read the English translation underneath. Summer Vacation at the Beach, 1977. I tried to inject some levity into my voice, to force the mood back to where it had been an hour ago. See? A beach trip. They're not even in the house for this one. This one has to be normal, right? No creepy neighbors hiding in the sand dunes, I promise. My voice was thin, and the joke fell completely flat in the heavy silence of the room. Chloe didn't answer. She didn't even look at the box in my hand. Her gaze was fixed, unblinking, on the dark square of the dining room window, as if she could still see the phantom figure standing out there in the night. My joke hung in the air like a bad smell. Kingi Hia Bien. Summer Vacation. It sounded so ridiculous, so desperately cheerful, that it only made the silence in the room feel heavier. Chloe didn't even glance at the little box in my hand. Her eyes were still locked on the dining room window, a black, glossy rectangle in the dimness. It was like she was trying to burn a hole through the glass with her stare to see the ghost that was still standing there. Chloe, I said, my voice softer now. The whole performance was over. It's okay. We can stop. She finally tore her gaze away from the window and looked at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Who was it, Liam? She whispered. The question was so simple, so direct, but it landed in my gut like a stone. I didn't have an answer. All my rationalizations, the weirdo neighbor, the dumb prank, they all sounded like children's excuses in the face of what we'd just seen. The deliberate, patient way that camera had watched them. I don't know, I said, and for the first time I admitted it to myself too. I truly didn't know. And that was terrifying. I put the beach movie down on the coffee table. The lightheartedness of the label felt like a mockery now. We sat there for a long time, the only sound in the house, the low drone of the projector's fan. It wasn't a charming vintage sound anymore. It was the hum of a machine that had shown us something we could never unsee. The house didn't feel like a warm blanket anymore. It felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner more menacing. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, and I surprised myself with the words that came out. "We have to see the rest." Chloe looked at me like I was insane. "What? Are you kidding me?" "Liam, no, I'm done. Turn it off. I want to put these things back in their box and throw them in the trash." "No, listen," I insisted, leaning forward. My heart was starting to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a thrill, it was a cold, clinical dread. "Don't you see? This isn't just a weird home movie anymore. This is something else. Someone was systematically stalking this family. We have to know how it ends. We have to know what we're living in." The logic was twisted, I knew that. It was like finding a snake in your bed, and instead of running, deciding to stay and see how many more there are. But I couldn't stop. I felt like if we just packed it all away now, the unknown would be worse than any truth the films could show us. The ghost in the yard would always be there, just outside our window, and we'd never know who he was or what he wanted. Chloe stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow, resigned sigh, she nodded. Just once. It wasn't an agreement, it was a surrender. I looked through the remaining boxes. I bypassed the beach trip, the Halloween special. My fingers found a reel labeled in that same neat script. Sun Sao, He, 1977. Backyard, summer 1977. My hands were slick with sweat as I threaded it into the projector. I didn't bother turning off the lights. The dim glow from the hallway felt like a necessary shield. I flicked the switch. The clicks started again, a sound I was beginning to hate. The image that flickered to life on the sheet was our backyard. Or what would become our backyard. The big oak tree was there, a little smaller, a little younger. But there was the lawn, the fence, the spot where Chloe wanted to plant roses. And there was the little girl, Lan. She was on a swing set, the kind made of old metal poles. She was alone, pumping her legs, trying to go higher, her hair flying behind her. For a second, it looked normal. Then I realized where the camera was. It was low to the ground. You could see the out-of-focus leaves of a bush in the foreground, framing the shot. Whoever was filming was hiding in the scrubby bushes that ran along the side fence, the same bushes we talked about tearing out. The camera was completely still. It just watched. Lan swung back and forth, lost in her own little world, singing a song to herself that we couldn't hear. She was so blissfully, terribly unaware. And then, it happened. The camera began to zoom. It was an impossibly slow, deliberate push, not the jerky zoom of a parent trying to get a cute shot. This was controlled, predatory. It moved past the swing set, past her swinging legs and settled on her face. It tightened and tightened until her laughing, innocent face filled the entire frame. The film was grainy, the color was faded, but the intensity was unmistakable. It lingered there, on her face, for what felt like forever. Just watching her. The shot was so tight you could see the sunlight glinting in her eyes. It felt possessive. Like the person behind the camera wasn't just recording a moment, they were trying to steal it. To own it. Chloe made a small, choked sound next to me. I reached out and took her hand. It was ice cold. The film just stayed there, a tight, suffocating close-up, until the reel ran out and the plastic tail began to flap, flap, flap against the gate. The sound was violent in the quiet room. I didn't move to turn it off. We just sat there, staring at the empty white sheet, the image of that little girl's face burned into our retinas. "There's one more," I heard myself say. I don't know why. I just knew we were in too deep to stop now. We had to see the bottom. Chloe didn't protest this time. She just sat like a stone statue. I found the last reel in the first box. The label was simple. Chilling. Chuk Moon Won, 1978. Good night, 1978. I loaded it. My fingers felt clumsy, thick. The clicks of the projector sounded like a clock ticking down to something awful. The new scene was dark. Very dark. It took a moment for our eyes to adjust, to understand what we were seeing. It was a room, lit only by the faint glow of a nightlight. A child's bedroom. We could make out the shape of a bed, a dresser, a little rocking horse in the corner. It was the small, spare bedroom at the end of our hall, the room we were going to turn into an office. And then we saw it. A lump under the covers. The gentle rise and fall of a small body breathing. It was one of the children. Lan, maybe. We couldn't be sure. The camera was, once again, outside, peering through the window. It was a winter night. You could see the faint frost patterns on the corners of the glass pane. The shot was static. It didn't move. It didn't zoom. It just watched. 1 minute passed. Nothing happened. The child slept. 2 minutes. The camera didn't waver. 3, 4. It was excruciating. The sheer, unblinking patience of it was more terrifying than any sudden action. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a ritual. A dedicated, long-term obsession. We were watching a predator watch its prey. The film ran for over 10 minutes. 10 minutes of a silent, unmoving shot into a sleeping child's bedroom from the darkness of the yard. And in all that time, nothing happened. The child just slept, safe in their bed, while just outside the glass, evil stood and watched. When the film ended, I lunged for the projector and switched it off. The sudden silence was a mercy. "That's it?" Chloe said, her voice a raw whisper. I can't do this anymore, Liam." I didn't argue. I got up, took all the films, the beach trip, the ones we hadn't seen, and put them back in the old metal box. I closed the lid. It felt like closing a coffin. We sat in the dark for a while longer, and then, without another word, we went to bed. But there was no sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes, every rustle of leaves outside the window was him, the man with the camera. I imagined him standing out there, right now, in our yard, his lens pointed at our window. The house, our fortress, our safe place, was completely compromised. Its walls felt as thin as paper. The next day, we tried to pretend things were normal. It was a pathetic attempt. We moved around each other, making small talk about grout and paint colors, but the fear was a third person in the room with us. It sat at the breakfast table. It followed us from room to room. Around noon, Chloe was in the kitchen. I was in the living room, trying to assemble a bookshelf, a mundane task that I hoped would ground me in reality. Chloe was trying to do the same, making us sandwiches for lunch. The sun was streaming in, the house was bright. It was the kind of perfect, peaceful domestic scene we dreamed of. Suddenly, I heard her gasp, a sharp, terrified intake of breath. I dropped the screwdriver and ran into the kitchen. "What is it? What's wrong?" She was standing frozen by the kitchen sink, staring out the window that looked over the backyard. She was holding a knife, her knuckles white. Her face was ashen. "Chloe, what's wrong?" I repeated, putting my hands on her shoulders. She swallowed hard, her eyes still fixed on the yard. "I felt it," she stammered. "Liam, I felt it. A prickle. On the back of my neck. Like someone was right there, watching me." I looked out the window. The backyard was empty. The sun shone on the grass. The big oak tree stood silent. "There's no one there, honey?" "No," she insisted, turning to me, her eyes wild with panic. "You don't understand. I was standing right here, slicing tomatoes, and I looked out the window, and I realized, this is it. This is the spot. The spot where the mom was standing in one of those first films. And the feeling, it was coming from there." She pointed with the knife. She was pointing at the cluster of thick, overgrown bushes by the side fence, the exact spot where the camera had been hidden in the backyard film. A cold wave washed over me. I wanted to tell her she was being paranoid. I wanted to say the films were just getting to her. But I couldn't. I saw the genuine terror in her eyes. "Stay here," I said, my voice tight. I walked to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the yard. The sun was warm on my skin, but I felt a deep chill. I walked across the lawn, my heart pounding, and went straight to the bushes. I pushed aside the thick, leafy branches. Peering inside, I saw nothing but dirt, tangled roots, and a few old, decaying leaves. There was no one there, no camera, no sign that anyone had been there recently. I circled the entire perimeter of the yard, checking every possible hiding spot. Nothing. I went back inside. Chloe was still standing in the same spot. "There's nothing there," I said, trying to make my voice sound reassuring. It didn't work. It sounded as hollow as I felt. That evening, the fear had solidified into a heavy, unspoken dread between us. Chloe told me she felt like she was going crazy. I tried to comfort her, told her we were just rattled by the films, that our minds were playing tricks on us. I was lying, mostly to myself. As darkness fell, I went to do my new nightly ritual, checking all the locks. Front door, windows, side door. I saved the back gate for last. I stepped out onto the small back patio. The air was cool and damp. A sliver of moon did little to pierce the inky blackness of the yard. I walked down the stone path to the wooden gate at the rear of the property, the one that led to the small access alley behind the houses. My hand reached for the familiar iron latch. I fully expected to feel the solid resistance of the bolt in its housing. I knew I had locked it that morning. I was certain of it. I had made a point of it. But my hand found nothing. The latch was loose. It swung freely under my fingers. The gate was unbolted. My blood ran cold. I stood there for a second, completely still, listening. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. I told myself I must have forgotten. It was the only explanation. I had to have forgotten. I slowly pushed the gate open a few inches. The alley was dark, empty. I closed it, my hand shaking slightly as I slid the heavy bolt firmly into place. The solid thunk was a small comfort. As I turned back towards the house, the beam from the patio light cut across the small flower bed Chloe had started tilling near the gate. And that's when I saw it. There, in the freshly turned, damp soil, was a footprint. A single, clear impression of a large work boot. It wasn't my sneaker print. It wasn't Chloe's garden clog. The tread was deep and distinct. It was fresh. And it was pointed directly towards our house. I slid the bolt home with a loud, satisfying thunk that did absolutely nothing to calm the frantic hammering in my chest. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, my hand still on the cold iron. The footprint. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a feeling. It was dirt and rubber and tread, a physical violation of our space. I turned back to the house. The warm light spilling from the kitchen window, which should have been a beacon of safety, now looked like the lit stage of a diorama, with us as the tiny, helpless figures inside. I walked back in, locking the patio door behind me with an extra, deliberate twist of the thumb turn. Chloe was where I had left her, still standing in the middle of the kitchen. She hadn't moved. The knife was on the counter now, but her hands were wrapped around her own arms as if she were freezing cold. "Well?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to say it. The gate was unlocked. Her face, already pale, seemed to lose its last trace of color. "What?" "Liam, you told me you locked it this morning. You made a point of it." "I know. I thought I did. I must have. I don't know. I forgot." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. It was a stupid lie, and we both knew it. "And?" she pressed, her eyes searching mine, already knowing there was more. I took a breath. There was a footprint. In the flower bed, by the gate. A big one. A boot. That was it. That was the breaking point. The fragile pretense of normalcy we'd been trying to maintain for the last 24 hours, shattered into a million pieces. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking but gaining a hard, sharp edge. "I'm done. I am done, Liam. We're calling the cops." She was already moving towards the living room, towards her purse where her phone was. I stepped in front of her, putting my hands up. "Whoa, wait." "Just wait a second," I said, trying to keep my own voice from cracking. "Wait for what?" she shot back, her eyes flashing with a mixture of terror and anger. "Wait for him to come inside. Look at what's happened. First the movies, then the feeling of being watched, now an unlocked gate and a footprint. This isn't a coincidence. This is a person, a real person, who is tormenting us. And we say what, Chloe? What do we tell the police?" I argued, my own desperation making me sound more aggressive than I intended. That an old neighbor lent us a projector and we found some creepy home movies from 50 years ago? That you got a weird feeling in the kitchen? That I found a single footprint in our yard? They'll think we're crazy. They'll file a report, tell us to keep our doors locked and leave. And then what? We'll have just poked the bear. "I don't care if they think we're crazy," she was almost shouting now, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "I would rather be crazy and safe in a hotel room tonight than be sane and terrified in this crime scene. What are you not getting? He was hiding in the bushes, he was looking in Lan's window, and now he is in our yard." She was right. Every rational part of my brain knew she was right. We should have packed a bag, gotten in the car, and driven away. But something else, something dark and compulsive, had taken hold of me. It was the same feeling that made me say we have to see the rest. It was the need to understand. I felt like we were characters in a horror story, and I couldn't bear not knowing how it ended. It felt like if we ran now, we'd be running for the rest of our lives from a shadow we couldn't name. "There might be one more," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Chloe just stared at me. It wasn't a look of shock. It was a look of genuine disbelief, as if she was seeing me for the first time and didn't recognize the person in front of her. "Are you insane?" she whispered. "Did you not hear a single word I just said? I'm talking about leaving, and you're talking about watching another one of those snuff films." "It's not a snuff film," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. "Look, this is the last piece of the puzzle. The box of films we watched was labeled 1975 to 1977. But there was a second box, a smaller one. I didn't even look at it properly. What if the answer is in there? What if it explains what happened to them? Then we'll have something real, something to show people. We have to know, Chloe. We have to know what we're up against." My logic was a twisted, broken thing, and I knew it. It was the logic of an addict promising one last hit. But I had to see the bottom. We were in too deep to just walk away. We stood there in a standoff in the middle of our brand new kitchen. The silence was thick with everything we weren't saying. I could see the battle on her face, the primal urge to flee versus the terrifying possibility that I might be right, that the only way out was through. Finally, with a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to drain all the fight out of her, she nodded. It was a slow, defeated gesture. "Fine," she said, her voice flat and dead. "One more. And then we burn them. I swear to God, Liam, we burn all of it." "Okay," I agreed, a sick feeling of relief and dread washing over me. "We burn it all." I went to the guest house, where we'd shoved all the miscellaneous junk, and retrieved the old metal box. I brought it back to the living room. It felt heavier than it should. I knelt on the floor and opened the second smaller box inside. It wasn't full. There was just a single reel, lying flat at the very bottom. It looked different from the others. The plastic was more yellowed, the edges more brittle, and unlike the others with their neat handwritten labels, this one had nothing. It was completely blank. Anonymous. My hands felt clammy and clumsy as I threaded the old, unmarked film into the projector. Chloe sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking small and fragile. She didn't want to watch, I knew, but she couldn't look away. Neither could I. I flipped the switch. The familiar click started, numbering off the seconds to whatever horror this last reel held. The beam of light hit the sheet we had tacked to the wall. For a few seconds, the screen was just a mess of distorted light and shadow, the way film looks before it settles. Then an image shuddered into focus. It was dark, terribly dark and chaotic. The camera was shaking violently, as if held by someone with a severe tremor, or someone trying to muffle their own movements. We couldn't make out anything at first. Just abstract shapes and deep blackness. "What is it?" Chloe whispered from the couch. "I can't see anything." "I don't know," I said, squinting. I leaned closer to the screen. The camera moved slightly, a jerky pan, and for a split second, a sliver of faint light cut across the frame. It illuminated a pattern. Faded, repeating floral shapes. My stomach dropped. I knew that pattern. I had spent an entire afternoon staring at it 2 days ago while planning where to hang a picture. It was our bedroom wallpaper. "Oh my God," I breathed out. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The camera wasn't outside. It wasn't in the bushes or across the street. The perspective was low, cramped. It was pointing slightly up, and there were vertical black lines breaking up the image. Thin, evenly spaced lines. "Liam." Chloe's voice was a choked sob of realization. Those lines. "The closet," I finished for her. My voice didn't sound like my own. "It's the closet door. He's filming from inside the closet." Our closet. The big walk-in closet in our master bedroom. The one whose louvered door I jiggled that morning, deciding on a shirt. The camera was inside the house. It had been inside the house all along. The image was mostly useless, just shaky darkness and a slice of decades-old wallpaper. But then, the sound kicked in. It was muffled at first, just the slight rustle of fabric, the sound of the person holding the camera trying to stay perfectly still. And then, we heard a voice. It was a woman's voice. A whisper. So faint we had to strain to hear it. It was full of a pure, distilled terror that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. "Hear something," she whispered. There was a pause, a shaky intake of breath. Then she spoke again, her whisper frantic, desperate. A message for the man lying in bed next to her. "Frank, wake up. I hear something." Silence. The only sound was the hum of the projector and our own ragged breathing. On the screen, the sliver of wallpaper remained perfectly still. The person in the closet was holding their breath. Then the woman's voice came again, even more panicked. "Frank, he's in the house. I swear to God, he's in the house again." Again. The word hung in the air of our living room like a toxic gas. This wasn't the first time. This was a siege. A prolonged campaign of terror. The family in these films hadn't just been watched. They had been hunted. On the screen, nothing moved. The silence stretched on for 5 seconds, 10, an eternity. We were all holding our breath. The woman in the film, the man in the closet, and the two of us, 50 years in the future. Then it happened. It wasn't a gunshot or a yell. It was a sound. A loud, sudden, sickening sound from just outside the camera's view. A wet, heavy thud, like a sack of concrete being dropped on the floor, followed by the splintering crack of a bedside lamp shattering. And then the scream. It ripped through the silent film. It wasn't a movie scream, not the kind you hear in horror flicks. It was the raw, guttural, agonizing sound of a soul being torn apart. It was a scream of ultimate terror and pain and loss, all in one horrific, drawn-out shriek. It went on, echoing in the tiny bedroom, and then it was cut short with a horrifying, gurgling finality. The camera fell. The image became a meaningless swirl of darkness and floorboards. Then, abruptly, the reel ended. The screen flashed bright, painful white. The plastic tail of the film began to slap against the projector gate, a frantic, mechanical rhythm in the crushing silence. Flap, 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 flap. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. My mind simply refused to process what I had just seen and heard. The house, our beautiful new house, our safe harbor, felt like a tomb. A morgue. We weren't just living in a house. We were living in a grave. The very air was thick with the memory of that scream. Chloe made a soft, whimpering sound. I finally broke out of my trance and lunged for the projector, fumbling with the switch until the horrible flapping sound stopped and the bright white light vanished. We were plunged into the dim quiet of our living room. The only light came from a street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The silence was worse than the scream. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The echo of that final, terrible moment was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air we were breathing. We sat like that for a full minute, maybe more. Two statues in the dark, lost in an abyss of shared horror. I couldn't look at her. I knew if I saw the look on her face I would completely fall apart. My own mind was a roaring vacuum. The footprint, the unlocked gate, the bushes, the closet. It all clicked into place, forming a picture so monstrous I couldn't fully look at it. Slowly, as if being pulled by an invisible string, my head began to turn. My neck muscles felt stiff, resistant. And my eyes, and I swear, at the exact same moment, Chloe's eyes, we both looked away from the blank white sheet on the wall. We looked past the doorway, down the short hall, into the darkness of our bedroom, towards the corner of the room, towards the tall, silent, white-painted louvered door of our closet. It stood there, waiting, unmoving, utterly, terrifyingly still. I don't know how long we sat there in the dark. Time had just stopped working. It broke. The only thing that existed was the silence and the ghost of the scream echoing inside it. My ears were still ringing with it. My whole body felt like a tuning fork that had been struck by that final, gurgling sound. We were statues. I was on the floor by the projector. Chloe was a lump under a blanket on the couch. We weren't looking at each other. We weren't looking at anything. And yet, we were both staring at the same place. Down the short, dark hallway. at the black rectangle of our bedroom doorway, and through that doorway, at the closet. My mind was just white noise. A scrambled mess of images. The smiling family in the first reel. The little girl on the swing set, the camera zooming in too close. The footprint in the flower bed. The wallpaper. That floral, faded, 70-year-old wallpaper. And the closet door. The louvered slats like teeth in a crooked grin. It was real. Whatever rational part of my brain was left, the part that tried to find logical explanations, just packed its bags and left. It was gone. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a creepy story. It was a murder. A murder that happened right there, 20 feet from where I was sitting. In the room where we slept. Where we were supposed to be safe. The air itself felt heavy, contaminated. I felt like if I took too deep a breath, I'd inhale the dust of that long-ago violence, that it would get into my lungs and choke me. We weren't the first owners of this house. We were just the latest occupants of a tomb. Chloe made a sound. It was so small, I almost missed it. A choked, wet whimper. The sound of a dam about to break. That was what did it. The sound snapped me out of it. Fear is one thing. You can drown in it. But hearing her sound so broken, so terrified, that turned the fear into something else. Something sharp and hot. Anger. A primal need to do something. We couldn't just sit here. We couldn't just wait for the sun to come up. Slowly, my limbs started to work again. They felt like they were full of sand. I pushed myself up from the floor. The sound of my jeans scraping against the wood floor was deafening in the silence. Chloe flinched on the couch. "Liam?" she whispered. Her voice was thin and brittle, like a dead leaf. I couldn't answer. My throat was clamped shut. I just walked, one foot in front of the other towards the hallway, towards the bedroom. "Liam, what are you doing?" she pleaded, scrambling out from under the blanket. "Don't. Let's go. Let's just get in the car and go." She was right. Every sane instinct screamed that she was right. We should run. We should leave everything behind and just drive until we ran out of gas. But I couldn't. It was the same sick, compulsive feeling I'd had before. The need to see the last reel. It felt like if we ran now, it would follow us. The thing in the closet. The memory. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It was in our heads. And I had to know. I had to see. I stopped at the entrance to our bedroom hallway and reached behind the little entryway table where we dropped our keys. My hand closed around the cold, smooth wood of the Louisville Slugger I kept there. It was a stupid, suburban affectation, really. I'd bought it thinking it was for a burglar, for some random act of violence. I never imagined I'd be holding it to face a ghost from 1977. I looked back at Chloe. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom, her eyes wide with terror. I put a finger to my lips. Not a commanding gesture. It was a plea. "Please, just be quiet for a minute. Let me do this." She understood. She stopped talking, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. The tears were streaming down her face now, silent. I took a breath. And then another. I started down the hall. Each step was a decision. The old floorboards, which usually had a charming, homey creak, now sounded like bones snapping. Every little noise spoke of decades of history. And I suddenly hated all of it. I reached the bedroom door. The darkness inside was thick, almost a solid thing. The only light was the faint, sickly orange glow from the street lamp outside, filtering through the window blinds. It sliced the room into stripes of light and shadow, and it illuminated the closet door. Tall, white, and silent. Utterly, terrifyingly still. I stood there, just outside the threshold, my knuckles white on the baseball bat. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was trying to listen. Listening for what, I don't know. A whisper from the past? The echo of a scream? The house was silent, dead silent. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's listening back to you. Chloe was a few feet behind me in the hall, a pillar of petrified silence. I could feel her fear, a cold radiation at my back. I told myself it was empty. The man from the film, the one in the closet, he was long gone. Dead, probably. This was just a room. Just a closet. The film was a 50-year-old nightmare. That's all. I was about to lower the bat. I was about to turn to Chloe and say, "You're right, let's go." And then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from the past. It wasn't in my head. It was real. And it was happening right now. A soft, clear creak. It came from the closet. It was a small sound. The kind of sound you'd dismiss on any other night. The house settling. A change in temperature making the wood contract. But not tonight. Tonight, it was the sound of a hangman's noose tightening. It was the sound of a coffin lid shifting. It was the sound of someone inside, moving. I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked back at Chloe, and I saw on her face that she'd heard it too. The last bit of color drained from her cheeks. This wasn't a memory. This was happening. He's in the house. He's in the house again. The words from the film ripped through my mind. That was it. The debate was over. The switch was flipped. The cold, paralyzing fear was burned away by a white-hot surge of pure chemical adrenaline. I was no longer a scared homeowner. I was an animal trapped in a cage with a predator. I gave Chloe one last look, a silent command this time. Stay back. Then I turned, raised the bat, and moved. I didn't think, I just acted. My feet crossed the threshold into the bedroom. 1 step. 2 steps. I was standing in front of the closet. The air here was so cold. I could feel the presence of it, the wrongness of it. It was like standing too close to a high-voltage line. My mind was strangely, terrifyingly clear. I remembered the man in the movie, what he had done. I thought of Chloe behind me. I thought, not in my house. I mouthed the count to myself. 1, 2. On 3, I didn't hesitate. I dropped my shoulder, put all my weight into it, and yanked. My left hand grabbed the closet handle and pulled with everything I had. The louvered door flew open with a loud clatter. For a split second, there was just darkness inside. A void. Then something shifted in the blackness. A shape. It uncoiled, like a sack of bones being tipped over, and fell out onto the floor at my feet with a soft, heavy thud. Chloe screamed. It was a raw, sharp sound that tore through the silence. I stumbled back, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, the bat held high, ready to swing. A figure was on the floor. It was tangled in on itself, a mess of limbs in the dark. It started to stir, groaning, a thin, reedy sound. "Light!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Chloe, the light!" Her hand fumbled against the wall by the door. A click, and the room was flooded with the warm, ordinary light of our overhead lamp, and we saw him. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some faceless, hulking intruder. It was a man. A thin, frail old man, sprawled on our bedroom floor. He wore a rumpled cardigan and corduroy pants. His thin, white hair was a mess. He was blinking against the sudden brightness, his face a mask of confusion and surprise. It was Mr. Henderson, our neighbor, the kindly old man from 2 houses down who had lent us the projector, the one who had waved to us every morning, the one who told us we loved the neighborhood. I just stood there, completely stunned. The baseball bat felt ridiculously heavy in my hands. It didn't make any sense. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to connect the image of this harmless old man with the decades of terror we had just witnessed. He started to push himself up, his joints popping. He looked at me, then at Chloe, and a flicker of something passed over his face. Not fear, not guilt. Something more like disappointment, like we'd ruined the shot. And that's when I saw it. He was still holding it. His bony, trembling hand was wrapped around it. It wasn't a weapon. It was a camera. A small, black, modern digital camera. And on the back of it, next to his thumb, a single tiny light was blinking. Red. Blinking. Blinking. He was filming us. Right now. We were the movie. The horror movie was happening again, and we were the new cast. That tiny, blinking red light was the most obscene thing I had ever seen. It was the final piece of the puzzle, and it slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The movies, the unlocked gate, the bushes, the closet. It was him. It was always him. 50 years of it. Mr. Henderson started to speak, his voice a dry, papery rustle. "You have to be still," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "You have to let the moment happen. I'm just saving the memories. The soul of the house. I didn't hear the rest. A roar filled my ears. The sight of that blinking light, the sound of his insane, wheezing voice. It was too much. The shock turned to pure, unadulterated rage. "Get away from her!" I screamed, and I shoved him. It didn't take much. He went down hard, tumbling back onto the floor with a pathetic yelp. The little camera flew from his hand and skittered across the wood floor, the red light still blinking, capturing the ceiling. "Call 911!" I shouted at Chloe, not taking my eyes off the old man. "Call them now!" Chloe was already moving, her phone in her hand, her voice a shaking, sobbing mess as she spoke to the dispatcher. "My husband, there's a man in our house. Our neighbor. Yes, he's still here." I stood over him, the bat held in a two-handed grip, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and fury. Mr. Henderson just lay there, looking up at me, a bizarrely peaceful, vacant expression on his face. "Such a lovely couple," he whispered to the ceiling. "A beautiful new beginning." And then, from far away I heard it. A faint, rising wail. A siren, growing steadily closer, cutting through the quiet suburban night, coming to our house. Coming to save us from the soul of the house. The siren got louder, a piercing shriek that seemed to scrape away the last bit of the night's quiet. It was a real sound, in a world that had stopped feeling real. I just stood there, my knuckles white on the baseball bat, my gaze locked on the pathetic, wrinkled man on our bedroom floor. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the ceiling, a faint, almost serene smile on his lips, as if he were remembering a pleasant dream. The little camera lay a few feet away, its red eye still blinking, a malevolent insect heart still beating. It was recording the off-white paint of our ceiling. It was capturing the sound of Chloe's ragged sobs into the phone, the sound of my own harsh breathing, the sound of the approaching wail. A new film for his collection. I don't know how long passed. Seconds? Minutes? Time was just a puddle. Then, the whole house lit up. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed through the windows, painting the walls in frantic, silent screams of color. One moment the room was red, the next blue. It turned Mr. Henderson's face into a grotesque, shifting mask. Chloe hung up the phone, her hand still clutching it like a lifeline. She stared at me, her eyes wide and blank with shock. The doorbell didn't ring. There was just a loud, firm knock and a voice. "Police! Open up!" I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs were bolted to the floor. It was Chloe who stirred, shuffling past me like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. I heard the front door open, the murmur of voices, and then they were there. 2 officers, a man and a woman, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. They took in the scene in a single, practiced sweep. Chloe, pale and shaking by the door, me, standing in the middle of the room with a baseball bat, and Mr. Henderson, still lying on the floor. "Sir, put the bat down," the male officer said. His voice was calm, but it held a steel edge that cut through my daze. Slowly, like it weighed 1,000 pounds, I lowered the bat. It clattered against the hardwood floor. The sound was obscenely loud. The officers moved in. One knelt beside Henderson, the other kept her eyes on me, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Is this the man?" she asked Chloe. Chloe just nodded, unable to speak. The other officer helped Henderson sit up. "Mr. Henderson?" he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Can you tell me what's going on?" Henderson blinked, looking at the officer as if he were a minor character who'd walked into the wrong scene. "The light was perfect," he whispered, his voice dry as old paper. "They just came home. A new start. You have to capture the beginning, or the rest of the story makes no sense." The officers exchanged a look. It was a look that said they'd dealt with this kind of confused, rambling call before. The kind that ends with social services and concerned relatives. But then the male officer's eyes fell on the little digital camera on the floor. He picked it up carefully. He saw the blinking red light. He pressed a button, and the light went out. The look on his face changed. The professional patience hardened into something else, something colder. "He was in our closet," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding like a stranger's. "He was filming us." That was it. The whole situation shifted. They got Henderson to his feet. He didn't resist. He seemed completely docile, almost limp. As they led him out, he looked back at me, not with malice but with a kind of gentle reproach. "You ruined the moment," he said, his voice full of a strange artistic sorrow. "The climax was supposed to be. His voice trailed off as they guided him down the hall. We spent the next 2 hours talking to the police. We told them everything. The box of films, the changing camera angles, the voice on the last reel. We played the end of that final, terrible, Super -8 film for them on the old projector. They watched, their faces grim, the flickering image of the dark closet, and the sound of that final scream filling our living room. It felt different now, with uniformed officers present. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was evidence. One of the detectives who showed up later was an older guy named Mathis. He had tired eyes, like he'd seen every ugly thing the world had to offer. He's the one who told us what they found. When they got a warrant and went into Mr. Henderson's house, they found his own little museum of horrors. It wasn't just the Super 8s, Mathis told us, sitting at our dining room table, a styrofoam cup of coffee untouched in front of him. That was just how he started. The basement, it was full of them. Shelves from floor to ceiling. VHS tapes from the 80s and 90s. Digital tapes from the 2000s. Hard drives. Dozens and dozens of them. Labeled. Every family that ever lived in this house. I just stared at him, my mind trying to process the scale of it. It wasn't just one family in the 70s. It was all of them. It was us. He had blueprints of the house. Mathis continued, his voice low and flat. He knew all the crawl spaces, the vents. He had tiny microphones planted. The closet in your bedroom, there's a false back panel that leads right into a crawl space connected to his property line. He'd just come and go for 50 years. He was the ghost. He was the thing in the walls. The soul of the house. That's what he'd called it. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. Our home, our perfect, safe little home, had a secret door. A door for the monster. And he'd had the key the whole time. The next few days were a blur of numb shock. The police finished up. The press showed up for a day, their vans lining our quiet suburban street. But we refused to talk to them. We stayed with Chloe's sister for 2 nights because we couldn't bear to be in the house. But you can't run from a house you own. So we came back. It wasn't the same. It never would be. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner, was him. The house didn't feel cozy anymore. It felt violated. It felt dirty. The floral wallpaper in the hallway that I'd once thought was charming just looked old and stained with secrets. We talked about selling. We probably should. But the thought of packing up everything, of admitting defeat, felt like letting him win. So we tried to reclaim it. We had every lock changed. We hired a security company to sweep for bugs and cameras. They found 3, 1 in a smoke detector and 2 pinhole mics in the walls. We had a contractor come and seal up the back of the bedroom closet with 2x4s and half a foot of solid concrete. But there was one last thing. A week after it all happened, on a Saturday morning, I knew what I had to do. Chloe was out getting groceries, trying to force some normalcy back into our lives. The house was quiet. I went to the living room. The old projector was still on the floor where we'd left it. And next to it, the old metal box of films. The source of it all. I just wanted it gone. I didn't want to see it, think about it, or know it was under my roof for another second. I was going to take it and the projector and dump them in the trash so forcefully they'd break into a million pieces. I walked up to the attic. The air was still and dusty, smelling of old wood and insulation. Sunlight streamed in through the single round window at the far end, illuminating a river of floating dust motes. And there, sitting right in the middle of the floor, was the spot where Chloe had found the box. A perfect square of lighter-colored dust outlined where it had been sitting for who knows how long. I was supposed to be cleaning the whole place out, but I knew I had to start with this. This was the cancer. I walked over to the box and grabbed the rusted metal handles. I was expecting it to be heavy, but it was just full of old film reels. I lifted it straight up. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a small, distinct, rolling sound. Tuck, 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 clink. Something had rolled out from under where the box had been sitting. It came to a stop a few inches from my foot. I looked down. My blood ran cold. It was a single film canister. A Super -8 film canister, just like the others. But it wasn't like the others at all. The dozen or so reels in the box were old, their metal cases tarnished, their paper labels yellowed and brittle with age. This one was new. The plastic case was clean, almost glossy. It hadn't been sitting there for 50 years. It hadn't been sitting there for 1 year. There was a small rectangular space on the old floorboards that was clean. free of the thick layer of dust that covered everything else. A space the exact size and shape of this film canister. It hadn't been under the box. It had been placed under a loose floorboard, right where the box would be set down. A trap. A final surprise. My hand was shaking as I bent down to pick it up. My fingers felt clumsy and numb. It felt cool and smooth in my palm. There was a label on it. A clean white paper label, just like the others. And on it, written in the same neat, slightly slanted handwriting as Christmas 1976 and Lan's 5th birthday, were 2 names and a date. It read, Liam and Chloe, move-in day, fall 2023.